Okay, good evening, everybody. I think it's just after 7, so we'll make a start. The meeting's now been recorded. So good evening, everybody, and thank you for your attendance. And welcome to our first overview and scrutiny for services meeting, although tonight will be run slightly differently. And when I change, I'm going to slightly change the order, and I will explain why. But we've got to obviously go through the agenda, and apparently we've got to be reaffirmed as Chair and Vice Chair. So I'll hand over to Fiona.
Thank you, Councillor Denis. Members, you'll recall that the membership of this new committee was confirmed at Council last month, with nominations for Councillor Denis as Chairman and Councillor Marriott as Vice Chairman. I could just ask the committee to confirm those appointments for the rest of this council year.
Agreed.
Thank you. I'll hand over to the Chairman.
Thank you. I was just checking to see if anybody said no, but fortunately nobody did. So thank you for that. Apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chairman. I've not received any apologies, but we are without Christine Baker and Sally Dixon at the moment, and don't have any substitutes.
Okay, thank you for that. Declarations of interest.
None received, Chairman.
Excellent. I wish all meetings went this quick. Questions by members of the public?
No questions from members of the public and none from members either.
Thank you. So what we'll do is we'll go straight into what we're here for tonight. That's the Dunsfold Park SPD. Before we go into the actual presentation, I'll ask maybe Zach just to say a few words. Just set the scene, please.
Certainly, thank you very much, Chairman. We do have guest speakers here from Allies and Morrison, who are the company, the consultancy, who have put together the first draft of the SPD that we'll be presenting. And we have Mark and Alistair here online, and I'll be handing over to them in a second. I just thought it might be useful to set out a bit of a context as to why we're here and why we're seeking to produce a supplementary planning document. I'm sure you're all well aware of the history of Dunsfold Airfield and the Dunsfold Park site, so I won't go into that other than say obviously it's allocated for up to, well, around 2,600 homes in local plan part 1, with an outline hybrid permission already having been granted for 1,800 homes. We have policy SS7 and SS7A set out in the local plan part 1, which talk about how we anticipate the developments come forward. And as you'll probably be aware, we had been working with Dunsfold Aerodrome Limited and Rutland, who were the previous parties in conjunction with Trinity College, Cambridge, who were moving forward with master planning the site. Trinity College at the beginning of this year decided that they wanted to sell the site, the whole site, including the commercial elements as well. So we took a view as planning officers that in the absence of knowing who the purchaser would be, we felt it would be prudent not to lose some of the good work that had already been done in looking at sort of working with the community and looking at the master plan, and to put some further meat on the bones of the policies in the local plan through adopting a supplementary planning document. That has to go through a consultation process. There'll be a minimum 4 weeks consultation if this is voted through ultimately by executive to get feedback. But effectively, once adopted, it becomes a material planning consideration in determination of planning applications, and will just give us a bit more weight to ensure that our vision for the site, or the community's vision for the site, in terms of a garden village with high quality development, sustainable development, could be achieved. And that the garden village principles are also followed. As you may be aware, we have received funding from Homes England of around £250,000, I believe, to take forward the proposals for the site and to help deliver high quality sustainable housing on the site. And just to say that the supplementary planning document would be funded through the monies that we've received from Homes England. I think that's probably all I need to say at the moment. So I'll pass over to Alistair and Mark, and I'll let them decide who's going first. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Zach. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. I'm sorry we can't be there in person this evening. Hopefully you can see my screen at the moment. Zach, maybe if you could just confirm.
Yes, we can see your screen. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you. So we've got about 10 or 15 minutes worth of slides to quickly run through the SPD context. So I'm Alistair MacDonald, Director at Allies and Morrison. I'm joined by Mark Leitner-Murphy, an Associate at Allies and Morrison as well. And this evening, we'd like to quickly talk through really the background and then give you a sense of the scope of the document and our emerging vision and proposals that are set out within the draft SPD. So starting at the beginning, as you're well aware, and I think as Zach's really covered, the purpose of the SPD is to supplement the adopted policies that sit alongside the site allocation. And we've been very keen to define a very flexible context for development to come forward. We're trying to set out guidance and parameters which will allow a range of different planning and delivery scenarios to play out. And obviously at this point, in terms of that, that context that Zach set in terms of the change of ownership, it's not kind of clear at the moment exactly how that will happen. So it's important the SPD can accommodate a range of different approaches over the next few months and years. And finally, critically, we're hoping to support the delivery of the site allocation as a whole. Obviously, that's the 2,600 homes, and the 26,000 square metres of employment growth, and providing a context for future planning applications, and that could include outline elements, or it could include reserve matters applications as well. So the site boundary, you'll be well aware of, it matches the allocation boundary. Obviously, the access road, which has been subsequently applied for in detail, actually just slightly crosses that boundary, but we're assuming that is really taken as a given, really, for the purposes of the SPD. And also very aware of the context, particularly in relation to the landscape setting, the AONB designations to the north, the Surrey Hills, but also the area of great landscape value, which is this green hatch. And then around the site on the fringes, there are a series of nature conservation designations, SSSI, and also an area of archaeological potential. And all of that is obviously critical in terms of the detailed planning of the site. We've had quite a quick process since appointment in the summer. We had the benefit of a really helpful and positive site visit with Dal and Rutland right at the beginning of the process. And as a team, we've been reviewing the consented material and also the evolving master planning work that Dal and Rutland have been progressing with officers, and also through the Design Southeast design review process. We've also been looking back at the primary policy position and having a series of very constructive meetings with the Dunsfold Advisory Group. And I think one or two members in the room today are probably represented on that group. There's also been a process of screening the site in relation to habitat regulation assessment and strategic environmental assessment, which we can cover if necessary during discussion. And then really the meat of the document is setting out design and planning guidance, which is a combination of drawn material, but also words and written guidance alongside that. So the draft SPD has now been circulated. We will be going through a process of design review with Design Southeast. We had a chair's briefing last week, which was a really positive start to that process. And as Zach said, there'll be a 4-week consultation period. Beyond that, we'll then be updating the SPD in the new year with a view to adoption, picking up any comments that are made through the consultation process, obviously assuming the executive endorse that approach next week. A lot of planning history, again, many of you be more aware of the detail of this than we are as newcomers, really, but going right back to 2009, obviously there's been a really valuable process of design review, the Secretary of State decision in 2018 in terms of the grant of the outline, and then subsequent more detailed design work that's been undertaken. But obviously we're at a kind of critical point, really, in terms of that change of ownership, and we hope this document provides a really valuable basis for moving forward. So as I mentioned, the SPD needs to be very flexible in accommodating different planning and delivery scenarios. So the base scenario really is that the existing outline consent for 1,800 homes is progressed. And then there might be subsequent planning applications to bring the site up to that full 2,600 home allocation. We know in that scenario, through the conditions on the outline consent, that there is further master planning work that's being undertaken, the development of a design code alongside that as well. So within that, we're expecting there probably would be some revisions to the existing consent, but also obviously to get to the full 2,600, there would need to be additional applications made. The second scenario is that the existing consent is reviewed and expanded more comprehensively to reach that full 2,600 home scenario. And then the third scenario, of course, which is perhaps theoretical, but the third scenario is that a completely new application might be prepared, and obviously that would need to be in line with policy SS7 and SS7A and the SPD itself. And I guess really we wanted to just highlight that all three of those scenarios would require some review of aspects of the original consent. They would need new or extended applications to reach that full allocation. And also there would need to be detailed design for each phase at reserve matters stage. So really the SPD has a really vital role to play at this point, even though the allocation exists and the outline consent is in place. And all of that is an incredible step forward in terms of delivery of the site. There is obviously still work to be done, and the SPD will play a key role in managing that. I'm going to hand over to Mark now to talk about our vision for the SPD.
Thanks, Alistair. So yeah, we'll talk through some of the vision and introduce the vision wheel. If you ever just click, that's great. So we have set out a cross-cutting and quite strategic vision that really seeks to capture the scale of ambition for Dunsfold Park Garden Village, and also the essence of what it would be like to grow up, grow old, raise a family, visit or work in the village. So these are themes that cover elements of placemaking in homes, health and well-being, ensuring there's an integrated economy, and also crucially to sort of a golden thread running through a lot of the SPD is around sustainability. So this is quite a helpful tool for helping sort of frame proposals, and also a useful tool for communicating with either applicants, members of the public, councillors, etc. We've also assembled then a set of spatial principles, if you like. So these are principles that should really be shaping the proposals coming forward for Dunsfold Park Garden Village. And this is really taking the attributes and reinforcing what was good around the consent and those conditions, and really giving that strong spatial footing, if you like, for the council in the material considerations. So these cover elements around responding to key historic assets around the site, creating a multifunctional green and blue infrastructure network, and then also around creating a settlement with a variety of distinctive places. So it's not just one place and homogenous, but there's variety, intrigue, and it's a really sort of a distinctive, interesting place to live, work and visit.
Mark, so I think it's worth just highlighting, obviously the existing consent still has status. Those parameter plans are as consented a couple of years ago. And it's important, obviously, to emphasise that the drawings in our document are framework drawings, they're diagrams, they're not intended to be as detailed and as resolved as parameter plans would be. And obviously, as I explained at the beginning, we're thinking about the full 2,600 home site allocation as opposed to the 1,800 home planning consent. So clearly over the past couple of years, there's the consent itself. The applicant has been progressing the master plan, and all of that is taking a very kind of positive step forward as the site moves closer to delivery. We've defined a high-level framework which has a number of common features, really, which you'll recognise from the original consent. And just to highlight those, firstly, one of the key moves is obviously the retention and expansion of the business park, which is consistent between the two. Secondly, the creation of the runway park running east-west, which is a really vital structuring and placemaking device. Thirdly, the identification of a village green and a clear village centre, which will feel very familiar from the consented scheme. Fourth, the green swathe of landscape, the country park, the area for biodiversity gain, which sits to the west of the majority of the settlement and then runs south to meet the canal. And then finally, the distinctive arrangement of petals, neighbourhood petals, and then green fingers or green wedges between them, which again is very consistent with the original scheme. Where we've moved things forward slightly and hopefully enhanced the overall potential of the site in the context of the full allocation. Firstly, obviously, we're talking about that larger target, which is obviously important from a local housing delivery perspective. Secondly, whilst we're retaining that distinctive crescent feature, it's perhaps less of a dominant image, a dominant part of the proposals. Before it was a larger and more formal part of the layout. Now it's tighter and more compact and very much about the centre. Thirdly, we're encouraging a slight shift in gravity northwards, so the village centre and the business park area, there's a bit of overlap, and we're hoping that this northern part of the centre has a very kind of business-focused feel to it, but it's creating a real hub and central employment space that's actually part of that village centre, as opposed to feeling like a slightly separate entity. Fourth, there's been some rationalisation of the shapes of the development parcels and the green wedges to try and strengthen them from a placemaking perspective. And fifth, which I think is quite a key move really, it's trying to create more of a defined edge to the canal. So the basin, we've suggested a potential location for that, which avoids removing existing mature woodland. And that basin may actually have some degree of community space and a local centre feel to it, which would be a key element of defining quite a distinctive character around that part of the site. And also we've been thinking about potential alternative locations for the school, particularly the main primary school, and locating it more centrally in relation to the village centre. So Mark, I'll hand back to you now. Thanks.
Thanks, Alistair. So now we're just going to introduce the scope and structure of the SPD. This has been organised into 4 parts, A to D, with A covering context. It's very much around this scene setting for the SPD, its purpose and how to use the document, but also some of that important policy context that Alistair's already run through earlier on. And there'll be a summary of engagement and those processes. Part B is the master plan framework. So this is where we're picking up the overarching vision for the site, those vision statements, those illustrated spatial principles, and then also a sequence of area-wide framework plans, which we'll also run through shortly. Part C is around site-wide design codes. These are succinct design codes organized under intuitive headings. They're really quite clear statements of intent and requirement, and then also illustrated parameters to help bring those and augment some of those in discussions with development management and the design process. And then part D is around character areas. So this is a bit more place-based, a bit more qualitative and descriptive, trying to convey the vision about key different parts of Dunsfold Park Garden Village and what it will be like to experience those different qualities and conditions. So we'll start on the master plan frameworks, which would be from part B. We've pulled together a comprehensive suite of framework plans that cover spatial guidance across a number of really key themes. This includes an overarching development framework, and then that's supported by 2 landscape and open space plans, 2 sustainable movement and street hierarchy plans, 2 plans around land uses and densities, but also building heights. And then critically helping to draw a lot of this together and give it real context is a plan around placemaking and the approach to these neighbourhoods. It's important to say at this point, all of these reflect the approach and direction from the consent, and then also those associated conditions. So we're sort of reinforcing that and giving that strong policy foothold. This is then also supported by a sort of indicative sketch, bit of a hybrid between almost like a master plan drawing and the frameworks, which are giving a bit of life to some of these conditions and considerations. And we sort of return to this in part D as well. So part C is a set of design codes. These cover 4 key areas of guidance, covering these important aspects for designing and also that sort of expectation of quality of these different conditions found across the garden village. So we touch on urban design, which sort of covers strategic aspects of design, thinking around views, corner plots, and so housing mix. There's also sustainable building design, so sort of zooming in a little bit more to that sort of building plot scale, more detailed requirements on this design around designing for adaptability, energy efficiency, and embodied carbon. And then also really sort of fundamental important requirements around how to design good car parking and good cycle parking too. Streets and public realm, this is really the interface between buildings and open spaces. So thinking around the street is sort of an extension of the public realm that should be a livable space that's active. Thinking around key components such as the village green or neighborhood greens and how they can bring together and be social points for communities. And then also key guidance again around sort of street furniture, lighting, and cycle parking, car parking within those open spaces. Landscape and green infrastructure. This is really crucial, thinking around good guidance on the natural environment and making sure, for example, there's enough space for trees and planting to really thrive and mature. That will become a really fundamental characteristic of the garden village as it settles in the landscape. Also, key points around play and making sure accessible play is well designed and integrated throughout the village. And then also, again, key points around biodiversity and the expectation there for introducing wildlife corridors that can permeate and cross the site and stitch into that broader neighbourhood network, countryside network. And then character areas. So this is sort of part D. We've drawing on the indicative sketch framework, which is a really helpful device. And we've drawn out 5 key areas and they're really distinctive characteristics from across the village. And we sort of illustrated that with a sketch drawing and then also annotations. So covering areas including the business park and the village centre, the canal basin, a typical neighbourhood, and then also the woods, which is a lower density element of the development. These are important because it's almost zooming in that vision to a finer grain to then be thinking around what are those key characteristics and experiences, that look and feel of these different and really important parts of the village. That covers things around character and scale, the uses and activities, but then also touches on the landscape character areas as well. So further guidance to give a real feel about the expectation of the character and conditions of the runway park, the village green, a green wedge, or the canal basin.
So that's great. So in terms of next steps, we're obviously subject to approval to go out to consult. We're undertaking a range of different methodologies with this. So firstly, there'll be the website with a recorded presentation that people will be able to access. We're planning to have a couple of stakeholder workshops kind of dotted really between the beginning and the end of that 4-week process. There'll also be an opportunity for a webinar, which will be a kind of more Q&A based approach. And also officers will be available at an exhibition, which will be taking place across a number of days through that 4-week period. As I mentioned, we'll also be speaking to Design Southeast for a full panel review. And we'll also be meeting the advisory group as well within that period. So perhaps if I hand back to the chair, I really appreciate your time and patience there. I'm very happy to contribute to any discussion or questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark and Alistair. It's 160 pages we had to read, and I'm glad you've been able to sort of condense that into about 20 minutes to make some sense of it. I mean, I've been fortunate that I've attended several meetings where I've seen this presentation or similar presentations, so I'm starting to get to understand. I have a number of questions, but I think it'd be unfair for me to start. And I think Councillor Hyman would want to speak first, but what I would like to do tonight is actually have the committee speak first so they can get their questions. We've had the presentation, and maybe if Jerry can wait till that information's come out, then if you have questions to then do it at the end, when hopefully some of the information may have come out in the wash. So
pleased to do so. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Councillor Baker, hello.
Yes, Chair, I must apologise for my late arrival. It was entirely due to unforeseen circumstances. I got so far in one car and had to take it home and bring another one. But I have read the document from cover to cover and made notes. Right. So please be assured.
Well, thank you for making that special effort to get here. That's very much appreciated.
Okay.
So I'll open it up. It's very different from a normal ONS, but I'll open it up for questions, and then Mark and Alistair, between them can answer them. This is to almost scrutinise a document before it goes for scrutiny by the public. So it is a slightly different process, but I think a process that gives it an extra layer of scrutiny. So that's very good. So I open it up. Who wants to ask the first questions? Well, at this rate, it'll be my questions then. Councillor Darcy, thank you.
It's just quite a simple question. There's an abbreviation, well, there's several abbreviations which aren't really explained, but there's one, it's MUGA. I just wondered what that was meant. Okay, and the other one was, I know what it means, it's AOD, but I think that it's a bit obscure.
Above ordnance datum.
Yeah, I know that, but
Yeah, no, I'm just
most people
clarifying
won't.
for others in case they,
Yeah.
sorry.
Those are the sort of things I was looking at, really. They were fairly trivial stuff like that. But I can come back later with other questions.
Thank you. Maybe a good point would be to have a glossary of terminology either at the start or the end of the report for when it goes out for consultation.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? This is your time to scrutinise and ask the difficult questions. Councillor Ells.
I'll help you out, Chairman, with not exactly a question, but a statement, really, just to start the ball rolling. I think this is an excellent idea. I'm afraid before I can really comment or form an opinion, I need to hear a bit more of the debate, but in principle, I think it's a really good idea to safeguard the Garden Village initiative, which I felt at the time when it was first granted by the Secretary of State was a really brilliant thing for Waverley. So that's a good thing. I've got a very simple question here. I can't be too technical, I'm afraid, because this is all a little bit beyond me. Oh, by the way, really, really pleased that we have a place shaping aspect to this, because I have been an advocate of place shaping for quite a few years, and I would like to see much more of it in Waverley, actually. So that's really pleased me. But in the original design of the Garden Village, we had areas where there were no cars allowed. Do we still have that? I don't know if I missed it in this document, but we had areas where there were no cars and there were going to be carpools. And I wondered if that was still part of the plan. Thank you.
Mark or Alistair, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for the question and also the suggestion of the glossary. Certainly agree with that. There'll be certainly building on the original parameters and that sort of visioning around sort of car-free spaces in parts of the village centre and sort of just the surrounding neighbourhood from there. Certainly the intention is to have a lot of either pedestrianised streets or sort of shared streets where there's that pedestrian priority. And then the importance of how you resolve sort of parking with that. So whether that's taking parking off of the street within sort of concealed within a podium, or if it's also through sort of a parking barn approach where you can make sure that you're not having them dominating the streetscape. So there will be those areas, and then sort of outer neighbourhoods, if you like, at the fringes of the neighbourhood and some of those petals where there's sort of lower density, sort of larger houses. That's where they'll sort of be accommodating more parking and on-plot parking. So it will sort of be a graded approach, if you like. Hopefully it's really sort of building on the approach taken, yeah, with the consent. So we're just trying to reinforce that and not unpick that.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I just have two questions. I didn't see any allotments, and are there going to be any areas for build your own homes? Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of allotments, I think we have referenced them, but we'll double check that. But that's certainly something we think is important. It's important to have a local productive landscape. So we're very supportive of that. We'll check that reference within the document. And so I missed the second part of that question, Councillor Reid.
build your own homes?
Yes, absolutely. So we know that this is something that the council have been very keen to support. So within the document, in several locations, we are talking about the opportunities for self-build or custom build, but certainly self-build being an important element. To date, a lot of that discussion has been quite focused around the woods, which Mark mentioned, which is the lower density area. We also wondered whether there's an opportunity in terms of this more positive relationship with the canal, that might also be a really great location to pick up on some of those great examples from Amsterdam in particular, where you have a series of canal side homes which have a distinctive character and identity.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, excuse me. Just a very quick point. Obviously, at the moment, we're setting out sort of supplementary planning document principles, but we have had some very early stage discussions with the potential purchasers, Columbia Threadneedle Investments, and we have expressed the desire for the councils as a house builder itself to engage with the developers where we can. I mean, obviously nothing's been decided, and obviously decisions will be made by members, not by us, but obviously what we've said is we want an opportunity to really help shape the communities, the tenure mixes, etc. there, and perhaps get involved in that where we can. So what I was really saying is self-build is almost certainly going to be part of those discussions as well, but potentially, you know, also get council getting involved in it, but obviously that's a decision for a later date.
Thank you, Zach. Councillor Cameron.
Well, I'm probably being a bit impatient as well, but then that's nothing new, is it? I think it's a very good document. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I've read it before, if you see what I mean. There's an awful lot of it, which is what I would call generic design guidance. And, you know, I think what we want to do here is what we wanted to do at Hindhead, which we were discussing on site the other day, where we actually had a vision for the whole site, which was going to be beautiful and the best it could possibly be. And then obviously the planning system takes over and things come in bits and you don't get what you want. But we have a chance here, you know, to create a really lovely setting. And I'm a little bit worried that you've built in a lot of flexibility at this stage, because, I mean, we all know if you use a broad phrase, people will push the boundaries. Now, again, I appreciate this is not a designed, you know, we haven't got a detailed planning application, but, you know, I really feel we shouldn't be giving people options even at this stage. I mean, we don't actually want walls with bits of greenery in front. We want hedges. You know, there's certain things that we want as principle. We want this to be as friendly to biodiversity as it can possibly be. We don't want it just to make some token gestures. And I have to say, I'm a little bit worried on some of the pictures, which frighten the life out of me. I mean, to me, an animated street space is actually quite tidy. It's just got beautiful architecture that is animated within the street space. It doesn't actually need 4 children on bikes and a couple of roller boarders and goodness knows what to make it animated. And the other thing that I'm probably miles ahead of the game here, but I get really frustrated when we get application after application with very little amenity space for individual properties, and then some bit of green on the outskirts or in the middle or whatever. Love the village green idea and the petals, so pleased we're keeping that. I think that's a lovely idea. But I think, you know, sometimes we pinch too much from sort of individual dwellings and areas of dwellings. And, you know, we say, oh, well, you've got your bit of green over there. But I still say, if you've got to put your coat on to go out to a bit of green, in case you meet somebody, you know, it's not really the relaxing thing. The garden is, where you can just have a load of kids in there and supervise them. So I know these are details, but I am a little worried that this is so flexible. You know, I'll put it this way, I thought it would be more Dunsfold than it is. Obviously the master plan is, and that's lovely, but there's very little in terms of character. And when you talk about the different characters of the different parts, I mean, that is going to be so crucial. You can't suddenly have, you know, one set of materials and design, you know, next to another. There's got to be a sort of a gentle flow, hasn't there, as there would be in normal development. I mean, you've got the big ones on the outside, which is what always happens until you start sticking these, you know, generic developments everywhere. So I think of the Cotswolds, we're always being given places like Cambridge and Amsterdam as examples, but I just go to the Cotswolds where they do keep a unity of sort of stone. They, you know, they don't stop modern building, they don't stop design, they don't stop creation, but there is a sort of a feeling when you're there that, you know, there's a point to it, a pattern, and it's very pleasing to the eye. And I hope that's what we end up with on here. So as I say, I'm probably being too picky. I just feel it's a bit flexible.
Okay, thank you. I know Mark will be writing notes and putting all those views across when he does a summary at the end and gives us. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question relates broadly to stewardship and specifically to woodland management. And there's a lot of woodland on this site, and it includes ancient woodland. And I haven't really seen any indication of resources in perpetuity to ensure woodland management. And as regards ancient woodland, I know that the Forestry Commission has certain powers, but I speak from bitter experience as a site of ancient woodland within the parish, which I represent Milford, but within Whitley Ward, was felled, and I think perhaps the Forestry Commission weren't as able to inspect what was going on as one might have wished. So in view of my own experience, I'm concerned to see, well, to know at this stage what provision is going to be made for the active management of the woodlands as a whole, and the protection of ancient woodlands in particular. Thank you.
I think that's a very good point. I'm sure Zach picked that up as well, and the issues there. So I think that's worthy of, that should be mentioned when he goes out to consultation, because there'll be other people who will be concerned about the ancient woodland and how it's going to be managed. So Zach, do you want to add to that comment?
Well, yeah, just to say that, you know, it's a very valid point, and I welcome that. Obviously, the first thing to say is, you know, this will be a significant net increase in, you know, in woodland and tree planting over the existing scenario, but it's important that existing woodland is properly managed. What I was really going to come on to was so if the approach that Columbia Threadneedle go with is to carry on with the outline planning permission and come in with reserved matters, which I believe is their intention. Under that outline permission, there is a requirement for a master plan to be approved under a condition. One of the conditions actually requires master plan to be approved. Now, a lot of work was done on that with Dal and Rutland, and a lot of that good work has not been lost because it's been taken forward in this SPD. And I know from my initial discussions with Columbia Threadneedle that they intend to sort of follow that sort of general pattern. But what I'm really saying is there will be an opportunity at that stage to really drill down onto exactly what they're doing in terms of management. I wouldn't get too hung up on the fact that it's not mentioned in great detail in the SPD. It's certainly an important matter that we will pick up through our negotiations and discussions with the applicants.
Well, thank you very much. I'm reassured, because I did go through the document quite thoroughly and looking for that and a few other things in particular. So thank you for the reassurance.
Councillor Foraszewski.
Chairman, thank you. And can I say what an excellent presentation? I thought that was very professional, and I'm so pleased to see it condensed into something that we could understand straight away, rather than go through what I think is a very complex, very detailed document. So that was very helpful. So thank you. I agree a lot with what Councillor Coburn said, that there is flexibility in here. but I am very much in favour and supporting this document because I think it's what it needs. It needs that backbone to give it that extra bit of weight to take it forward. I've always been a little bit concerned, you know, because I think when everyone found out about the application site coming for sale, you know, there was this great thing that hung over us that we didn't know what the future of the site would be. And I think this might give us the confidence that there is going to be some progress in that position. And to do the garden village status and to do it justice, we really do need a document that is going to support it and give it weight. So going forward, I do support it. I think it's a good document. I think it's very complex, but I think I agree with Saki as well that this is just the start and we can put meat on the bones later and scrutinise more of the detail as we go through. So I think it's really important that we're having full engagement all the way through this process to get it to the end. But I see this is the first run on the ladder to make sure that we can get this up and running and get some inroads and actually get this site delivered as soon as possible because it's been dragging on now far too long. So I support the document. I think it's a good document. Well done, and thank you for your presentation once more. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I heard the two presenters mention that the size had been slightly altered. Could you just talk about that for a minute, please?
Happy to. So this is relating to the housing allocation. So I think the consent that was approved was for 1,800 homes, and with the allocation of the site within the local plan and policy SS7, that upper limit is 2,600 homes. So in order to just make sure that the SPD is giving that full coverage to the weight that's necessary to sort of supplement the policies in the local plan. The frameworks and the guidance really are about going up to that 2,600 homes to just make sure that all the I's are dotted and all the T's crossed, if you like. So it's still just providing that good basis and provides that scope for any uplift up to that 2,600. Yeah, hopefully that's provided a bit of clarity.
Thank you. Two more questions, basically. On page 8, 4.4, environmental assessment, can someone answer this question? Who has concluded that the proposed supplementary planning document doesn't need to undergo another strategic environmental assessment when things will be changing in the future? And I think especially planning, legal planning laws might even change. Could you talk about that, please? Thank you.
I can field that, Chairman. Yes, so the strategic assessment, environmental assessment report that's appended straight after the main draft document has been produced by the Principal Environmental Assessment Officer at Surrey County Council on our behalf. Effectively, yes, this is purely an assessment into whether or not this is in relation to the SPD, not the development itself. So I need to make that clear. This is just an assessment on whether or not the SPD needs further assessment. Obviously, as future phases come forward, there may well need to be further EIA work or strategic assessment work, but this is purely in terms of going out to consultation on this SPD, and that was their professional conclusion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marriott, the Vice Chair wants to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm a little concerned with the provision for electric vehicle charging. You talk about 3 or 4 sites where you have proposed banks of chargers, but we're going to have something like 2,600 cars at least on the site. And at some point, they're all going to have electric cars. So how are you going to cater for those? Currently, a typical journey might be in a day, 30, 40 miles, say, commute. Most car batteries would need to be charged
once a day, perhaps twice, but you're going to have a lot of car charging needs. When that comes to be the law, we're all going to have electric cars. So how do we cater for that?
Zach, I think you indicated to
Well,
speak first, and then maybe Mark.
Yeah, I'll pass over to Eliza Morrison in a second, if that's all right, Mark. But I was just going to say, in our normal practice with new housing, we do require electric charging points for each dwelling under a condition. So if it's not specifically addressed within this report, we can make that point. That's certainly that what we do with planning applications. Similarly, with things like limiting water use to the current sort of recommendation of 110 litres per day, per person per day. But we can eke those out in the SPD, either pre-consultation or following. I think it's a valid point, but rest assured, we would expect, I think what's in the report is about shared electric vehicle charging points for people coming visiting or going to the school or going to the centre, whereas actually each home should be provided with its own private charging point.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was getting to really. The shared things will work to an extent. I think I can imagine on any given day you might want every other house having access to a charging point, so if they're not connected to the house itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just echo what Zach said. Totally in agreement around those conditions associated with consent. And yeah, if we totally, there's space to be drawing that out and specifying that in greater detail in the SPD. So really valuable contribution. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And of course, there is a Surrey County Council policy on charging points, so we'd be expected to follow that policy as well. My first question was going to be from Councillor Darcy and then Councillor Baker afterwards.
Yeah, thank you. It's just want to say, first of all, that I was quite impressed with the sustainability angle for this document. There was a lot of stuff that was about sort of energy efficiency, water management, embodied carbon, and all these sort of good things. So I was pleased with that. Saw mention of heat pumps and solar panels. So that, again, that's good. And also rainwater harvesting, which is something that often gets forgotten. I have a few suggestions for possible additions, but I don't know whether that's appropriate at this point. And I do have a couple of questions, but I did think that in the vision, under the integrated economy, it might be useful to have something specifically about connectivity, as in digital links, because obviously that's going to be key. If you're getting a new settlement, you want it to be state of the art, all the latest to fibre to the house type of connection. And in sustainability, I felt that perhaps needed to be a little bit more about, as well as being a garden village, it should be a sensitive to and accepting of wildlife in design and management. So it's sort of an eco-village as well, because that's kind of what we'd like, I think, following up from what Councillor Coburn was saying about biodiversity. And then there was a question that I had on page 55, it talks about stewardship, and it suggests a community trust would be set up, which I think links into what Councillor Reid was saying and Councillor, yeah, that perhaps this should also be responsible for landscape management. I presume there will be a LEMP coming along with this, as per usual. And I presume that would set out exactly what the management would be for all the green spaces. And if that could be included, perhaps the community trust would have some oversight of that, so they could ensure it's done properly. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think again a point I'm sure Zach has noted that, but it's a point we need to make, and you know, the devil's in the detail on this. It's easy to write a report with lovely flowing words and lovely pictures, but it's actually what do they actually produce on when it comes to the application? Because if planning applications come in that don't meet the criteria that we set as a standard, then the applications won't get past planning. So it's to their advantage to comply at an early stage, I would suggest. I've got a couple of points which I'll raise. Is there anything else, Councillor Baker, you want to come back, and then I'll throw my 2 pennies worth in?
Thank you, Chair. I'm very grateful. It was a matter of collecting my thoughts. I'd like to pay a compliment actually to the organisation that drafted this and all those who are involved, because I was very pleased to see under flexibility and adaptability the alternative futures being addressed. And I'm sure we've all lived in houses where what we wanted to do wasn't possible. And very often householders will find that it's easier to build an extension than to change the interior of their house. And so this flexibility does lead to sustainability. So I'm delighted to see that. The other point I wish to make was, dare I mention it, traffic on the adjacent roads. I see signs of recognition. And that is, I'm picking something up on page 45, which refers to mitigation, really from traffic impact. Mitigation of traffic impact in relation to the adjacent road network, including the strategy for maximizing use of the principal A281 access. Well, I know about all the other accesses that exist at the moment because I go down Stoffels Hill on a regular basis and have access, gone past the other more hidden accesses. So I'm just wondering what we collectively can do about this vexed question of the increase in traffic. And I'm terribly aware of there will be cumulative impacts because of all the other development that's gone on in Cranley. And then if you look at that east-west route from Milford, Milford has to provide 480 houses because that's what the government is insisting on. So it would just be so helpful if we could all cooperate to get an acceptable answer to this.
Thank you. You've covered one of the points I was going to raise, but well, no, it's good that someone else raises it because I feel like a broken record, to be fair. So what I'll do is I'll go through some of my points just for completeness. I've raised them in several meetings before, so they won't be new to certain people here, but I think it's right. So Mark's got a copy of these. So one of the issues you've sort of touched on is the impact on the villages, and that's mostly traffic. There's no mention of the villages in the report. There's no mention of the impact on Alfold and Dunsfold being the two villages that you first come across, and then the wider villages, Hambledon, Hascombe, Whitley, etc., etc. So I think that's a little bit disappointing. In fact, the report doesn't, this document doesn't talk about how a large urban site is going to impact on village life in the villages. And I think that's a bit of a disappointment. Actually, I didn't even find the word Alfold, bearing in mind the site sits in Alfold. It would be like building in Godalming and then saying the site is 5 miles south of Guildford, but we don't mention Godalming. I think for the residents who are actually going to live in the area, I think it's quite disappointing. It's in Alfold, or 95% of it. We should be saying that, not saying it's 5 miles south of Cranley and X miles from Dunsfold. It actually sits in Alfold. One of the things I know a lot of the residents will be looking at will be the height of the buildings to make sure we don't have huge tower blocks. And I think that's been raised in previous meetings as well. There's a number of listed buildings on the site, historical listed buildings. I think one's prime meads and it goes back to about the 16th or 17th century. And initially there was lots and lots of talk about how they're going to integrate them into this site, and that seems to have been forgotten. So I think we mustn't lose the sight of that. There was talk of a museum. Now, again, if it's covered in 160 pages, it's probably the one bit I can't remember, but I didn't see that. And I know there's going to be a museum nearby, which may or may never get built, but the museum seems to have disappeared. I do love the pictures which shows lovely large mature trees, when reality is there'll be little twigs that get planted. I've seen some of the previous sites and you almost have to look where they are. So again, I think when we get to landscaping, Zach, I'm sure the committees who look at applications will want slightly more mature trees than a little twigs. The Compasses Gate really does cause me some concern. For those who come out of the Compasses Gate will know you've come right onto a 90-degree bend. And if the shrubbery is more than about a foot high, you can't see and you have to take your life in your hands, especially if you want to turn right because you've got cars coming. That's a real concern. Now, when the road was proposed, Surrey County Council said it was to take the majority of the traffic. But the problem is you are going to get half of that estate or the new garden village coming out of the Compasses through an inappropriate track. It's not even a proper road, the bit to the main drag. And the impact that will have on the residents, I think could be quite, yeah, I think it's going to be massive. When you look at the diagram 22, which is on page 40, so page 40. And if you look at the Compasses Gate, so it's that dotted red line, that is a main street. So it sort of almost indicates it's a main street. Well, why are we putting a road in and going to the expense of doing a road? The side road should be for emergency use, for the buses. So you've got emergency uses, but reality is probably the south of the whole of that garden village will come out of that gate and either turn towards the Allfold Crossways, which again, everybody will know is a bit of a nightmare. And at rush hour, you've got cars sitting in the middle of the road and all over the place, or right towards Dunsfold and the other villages. I'm speaking more on the residents' behalf. I know this is a major concern, so I think it's only right to raise that again in this public meeting. I think that's my little rant over. The only other thing which I think has a scrutiny stroke planning authority we've just got to be very careful of is often we have applications that come in piecemeal, and therefore you never get to see the overall picture because you can only deal with the application in front of you. And we know with some of the Cranley ones, and Councillor Townsend will know this better than most, with the SUDs and everything else, you deal with what's in front of you, but it's that accumulative impact of the 3 or 4 different phases. And I know from my experience with SUDs, which is mentioned in this document, Zach, I've seen some SUDs that do absolutely nothing. They are totally ineffective and they're supposed to retain water. And as soon as it rains, they go like rivers. So again, I think our comment, Mark, would be a concern that we want to make sure that the SUDs and the drainage and the flooding and everything else is absolutely nailed properly, rather than it's agreed and then afterwards we find it doesn't work. But as I said, the devil's in the detail, and tonight's not about the detail really. It's just really putting some points so the executive can decide eventually whether it should go for public consultation. I will come to Councillor Hyman in 2 seconds. I haven't forgotten you. I didn't mean that you'd be the last person and everybody else would go home. I'll ask Councillor Forashevsky and then I'll come to you, Jerry, for your...
I'm happy to have the second hour, no problem, thanks.
Councillor Forashevsky.
Yes, that Thank you, Chairman. You raised some interesting points, and the aviation is on page 49. But having said all of that, this application, the Dunsfold Park has already got permission to build on, and I don't think we can ever forget that. And there was a lot of consultation at the time. There was a lot of talk about traffic, and there was a lot of talk about, and it was one of the most contentious applications that have ever come before this council. But I think what this does is actually, it brings it together all on one site. So we've got better management of things like SUDs. We've got better management of traffic going out onto the 281. But, you know, the issue about traffic, whilst it's a big one, it was never overcome in the first application. And whilst I do have some concerns, or, you know, if you have I mean, like you said, Councillor Townsend, and I will remember well, the number of applications that came to Cranley, and they were all looked at in isolation. They weren't looked at as cumulative, and the impact of it being accumulative. And yet that was massive. So if you, and you know, these houses, if not built here, they'll get built somewhere. So that traffic will still go on the road at some point somewhere. And the environment and everything is changing as we speak. And I think what this site offers us is the best possible way going forward. What I think is important is this document puts meat on the bone to get this application to fruition, so we can get on, build it out, stop some of the unnecessary developments that may happen as a result of this not going through, and then actually be part of a process with the officers, with the advisory team, and with scrutinised groups like this, where we can actually shape it and make sure they deliver on what they're saying. I'll share some of your views about what some of these could be looked at. But what I would say, and I know I'm going to be hated for this, but be careful what you wish for. If this had been built a long time ago, Cranley wouldn't have suffered what it's suffered today. And the longer we leave this, the longer it goes on, the more places like Cranley are going to suffer. Like Alfold, what's happened to Alfold is criminal in my mind, but it is because we didn't as a council have the vision to actually bring this and develop it and deliver it much sooner. If we had it done, we wouldn't be sitting here tonight with 2,600. We'd be actually having something that we could say we've got a 5-year housing supply. So the list is endless of why we can't and shouldn't do it, but the actual benefits of this on one site is colossal and massive to this borough. I think what we need to stand by is that we get what we asked for, which is establishing the green village status and maintaining it. And that's what's important and something we can be proud of. But it's up to this council to shape it. But this document puts meat on the bone to get it to where we need it to be. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Before I hand over to, I've got a number of people who want to speak. You're absolutely right, whether people were in favour or not of the application in 2000, well, seemed to a lifetime away, whatever it was, 2018. Our role now is to make it the best thing we possibly can and put our personal views and hold them to account that they will deliver. It's not just pretty documents with lovely pictures, that when they say it's going to be a lovely, you know, something we can be proud of for future generations. So I absolutely agree. And I think so far all the points that have been put forward can help sort of mould this into what we want it to be. We all know the devil's in the detail, where we get an application into planning where they haven't done what they're said they're going to do, and the applications have been really poor. Hopefully this process will result in applications coming to planning where we can actually see the benefits and say it's a good application, maybe have some comments and get maybe a few additional conditions on. They've got permission, they will build, but let's make it really, really quality. And as a council, be proud of that. So I'm totally with you there. Now I've got a few people, 4 people put their hands up. I'll go to Zach first, then Councillor Townsend. I saw a little hand for a little question. I've got then Councillor Reid and then Councillor Else. So Zach, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I wasn't going to go through point by point on the issues that have been raised, but they're all noted, and hopefully Mark's made a note of those to report on to the executive. I think the point about this is not a standalone community set in glorious isolation, and that there are communities around there, does need to be drawn out, and I'll obviously discuss that with Alistair and Mark and Sarah Wells to see how we can draw that out. The The second point about the compasses bridge, again, noted. I think what you're really saying is, because obviously there is a permission that allows use of that access, but what you're saying is, right, let's not necessarily draw attention to it, and there might be ways to sort of reduce, minimize that level of use. And I think, again, that's something we can certainly draw out through the SPD, but more importantly through our discussions with Columbia, Threadneedle, and whatever developer they bring on board. And then I think the third point, actually, and I take it on board, because SUDS is a difficult one, and we don't always get it right. I've seen sites that do get it right. I'm thinking about Newhall in Harlow, which has a lot of similarities with this site. I had the pleasure of working on that many moons ago. What we do have here is a site that has the space to be able to do it right, do it properly, and that's the task, that's the test, that's the challenge for us as planners, to make sure that the developers get it right, and for you to hold us to account if we're not getting it right. But there is scope, there's lots of scope there. I did take the point about gardens, individual gardens, that was made earlier, and I think that's really important as well. But there's huge amounts of green space here as well, and I think good sized gardens are important. People want that. People are moving out of the cities to get gardens, particularly after the COVID and being locked in their houses. But I think there's fantastic opportunities to really build on that. But I take all of these points on board. I think I'll just stop there if that's all right, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Townsend, please join us.
Thank you so much, Chairman, for allowing me to come in there. Just something very, very briefly. And obviously, thank you very much for everybody's comments and for recognising how important this document is, because as much as we have obviously got an outline application for 1,800 houses, 2,600 in the local plan, but we're not quite sure what might come forward in the future, and this really ties in all that really hard work that's been done by not only our planning officers, but the previous or the still current owners of the site, and also of the local advisory group as well, which is made up of parish councillors as well. So everyone's done an awful lot of work, and it would be such a shame to lose that. But the reason why I asked to speak was because of something that Kevin said. And when I read the SPD, I also noticed that Orfold was not mentioned, and I have made comment on that myself. And it was an oversight, and I'm very sorry. And I have commented on that and said to Sarah, and I have just sent another email just to make sure, because yes, it definitely should be mentioned, and I can only apologise that it isn't. And I think the comments about the SUDS, obviously in Cranley, as has been mentioned, we have some very large sites, and there was a SUDS master plan for the whole of the site, and I'm not sure whether or not that would be appropriate, or some mention of that might be appropriate perhaps as well within this site. I think that this document here, is a document that the council would be able to work with, as sitting on a planning committee, and also something that the planners would be able to use as well. And I think, Eliza Morrison has done an awful lot of work and has really listened. And obviously we're still in that listening phase at the moment. This is a consultation. And, and it is, I do feel really positive about it. I do feel quite excited, I must admit, by the SPD. And I'm really hoping, I'm sure everybody here is as well, that we will produce something that will be a real legacy on that site, and somewhere that will be, that we'll be very proud of. Anyway, thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you for that. I've got Councillor Reid and then Councillor Else after that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I agree an awful lot with Councillor Coburn and Councillor Else, which I'm surprised about, but I do support what you've said about placemaking. I agree with that. And I also agree with Councillor Coburn's comment about the Cotswolds, having lived there many years, that we want it to be a wonderful place that we're going to be proud of. I also wanted to make a comment about community, because originally I was sold on the idea of the Dunsfold development because it was going to be a community which was, although it was very near Oldfold, was going to be self-sufficient. I don't see very much of self-sufficiency in this document. That's why I mentioned building your own home and allotments. I don't think we should, although in the past there was a big concern about transport and cars and deliveries. I support the idea of these garden villages being very much more self-sufficient. I mean, we're talking this evening even about assuming cars are going to be needed by everyone. Now, my lovely friend who is window cleaner and does my windows, he said, this would be wonderful for me living in this garden village. I wouldn't have to travel anywhere. There would be shops, there would be a school, everything should be there. So I think we need to think about developing this as a self-sufficient, as far as possible, community. After all, what is the point of naming it a garden village? There are a couple of other things I wanted to say. How can we ensure, and I took part in the Design Southeast presentations, and maybe a lot of other people in this room did, how can we ensure the quality of design? I know probably through planning, but I know that different builders will be building, different building companies will be building different little parts, but how can we ensure that all this vision is going to be translated into what we as a group here have decided is very, very good? That's one of my concerns. And I just wanted to mention, I agree with you on, I think it was you, Councillor Denis, on trees, having little twigs planted. But I just wanted to say that before we go any further, an awful lot of people are allergic to birch trees. And you see a lot of silver birches planted in developments. I would suggest that maybe that should not be, they should not be planted in too many areas, because the pollen from the spring blossoms are giving an awful lot of allergies to people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just that last question about how do we ensure, well, I'd look straight at Zach and say, well, this is where I would expect to see leadership from Zach. So making sure his team follow the aspirations of this council. Well, I'd also look at my fellow colleagues sitting on Eastern Planning to do the right thing. So we're not obstructive, we are constructive, and we make sure that the standards that we expect are maintained. So I think the responsibility starts with you, Zach, and then comes onto the planning committee.
Well, yes, and I'll just go back to the point that the whole ethos idea behind having a supplementary planning document is that it is formally consulted on. It's formally adopted by the council as a material consideration, which gives us a lot more weight if developments are put forward to us that aren't of the required quality and don't meet our vision. Then we have a lot more weight to be able to oppose those, and hopefully the inspectorate would back us up on that. Because, yeah, I mean, it's a very good point, and certainly the master plan that's required under the outline as well. It all works towards creating the vision, and it creates the foundations for a good quality scheme. But yeah, the devil's in the detail, and if schemes come forward that don't meet our requirements, then we mustn't be afraid of challenging those and refusing those. And again, that is a challenge for officers, but also for members if it does go to committee.
Thank you, Zach, and I'm sure planning committees won't be frightened to say no if it's necessary. I've seen it many times. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. And Councillor Reid, I hope it won't disappoint you too much, but I don't quite agree with the last point you made, so I'm sorry about that. Nothing personal. I don't think this village should be an enclave. I think that's a dangerous route to go down. And I think it should always be open to anybody who wants to go there. So that's the point of place shaping, makes it a place for people to want to go to. But those who are in there need to come out now and then, which takes me to my next point. And I'd like to see more in this document in regard to public transport. It's, you know, a couple of small paragraphs. I have seen a promise of public transport not upheld with the development of houses. And I think with this amount of houses and this amount of people, it's got to be a really serious effort to get public transport firmly on the map. So I'd like to see more of that in this account of what the plan might be. And the other thing I'd just like to say is it does actually mention in this document that no building will be higher than 4 stories. I would question whether 4 stories is actually necessary in a development like this. I would have thought that 3 stories was quite high enough. Anyway, those are my points. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. And again, I'm sure that point about the bus service, I know there's lots of legal agreements about in perpetuity for the bus service, et cetera, but I think if this is a public consultation document, we may be aware of that and seen it in other documents, but whether it's not clear enough for the consultation process, I'm sure that can be easily rectified. Any other questions or points before I come to Councillor Hyman, who's probably poised like a coiled spring? Oh, I've got one from Councillor Darcy.
Wake me up when it's time.
Okay, Councillor Darcy.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add to the public transport by saying that it doesn't state that it should be affordable, and I think that needs to be made clear, because if we want people to use it, the best way to make them use it is to make it as cheap as possible. Because if you make it like the bus services tend to be quite expensive, then people, they've got a car, they'll use the car. They'll have a car, won't they? But if it's very, very cheap, I mean, I would advocate it being free, but that's another story. I think it'll be more likely to be used. So that's.
Okay, it's a very valid point. Councillor Baker.
Thank you. I know I've come back once, so I'm grateful, but this is complex and it is a huge matter. There is something that occurs to me about the parking on site, actually. I would like to be assured, or I'd like to see in the document, a reference to accessibility for disabled people. I know there's a problem with not making cars too obtrusive in the scene when they're parked. But at the same time, I do think that all parking should be reasonably close to the houses and not just have some parking close to houses and some parking further away. Because what I'm thinking about is that disability can strike very rapidly and without being foreseen. And you don't want people to have problems with accessibility to and from their own house if the parking happens to be further away from the property they're living in. So it's maybe a detail, but I think it's important. It's a matter of accessibility.
It may be detailed, but it's good to raise it. So it's been recorded and those notes will be forwarded. I mean, as you know, most local authority car parks, if my memory serves me right, have to provide 6% of the parking bay should be for disabled drivers. So, you know, if it's done in a public car park, I think it's a point that's well raised. And again, I'm sure Mark is scribbling away. He's almost filled a book up of our notes, which is good. And you know, they're not as such recommendations. I think they're points that we want to be raised to the executive. I can see we have a number of the executive members watching as well, so they would have heard all of our points, which have been well made tonight. In fact, I can see we've got Betty Ames has been listening in. So good evening, Betty. Although you can't see us, welcome to the meeting. So we started off with not anybody wanting to put their hands up, but some really, really important points have been raised. And I keep saying Councillor Hyman, and then someone puts their hand up. So any final questions before or were you trying to get to 9 o'clock and the question hasn't come out?
No, they can have another go after me
That's
if
a
they want.
tactic.
I'll probably remind them of something anyway. I'm bound to at some point.
Councillor Hyman, you're welcome to speak. Although we've allowed people to come back, I don't think anybody's exceeded 4 minutes. So if you can try and keep it to 4 minutes, and my trusted person, over to you.
Hang on, we've had how many people? About 6 people speak. And we've done over an hour and 20 minutes, and no one's done over 4 minutes. So yeah.
Be grateful.
I hope
4
you're not
minutes.
the mathematician in charge of this charge of this development, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just actually to start with, I'm pretty sure from when the original application went through, that the traffic impacts, it was stated, I think, in the environmental impact assessment that the traffic impacts were for the 1,800 homes, not for the full 2,600. And it was on those grounds that I voted against, because the EIA has to be complete. Officers did address it, but I wasn't satisfied with what I was told, and I did vote against on those grounds, because obviously that is the biggest issue. So I think it would be a good idea perhaps for members of the committee, if they wish to, because obviously I've got no right to say, I'd like the executive to do this or that. It's whether this committee would be happy to include a couple of things that I can recommend. I've got a list of half a dozen, 8, 9 points that they might want to consider recommending to get answers to, or to pursue in advance. I'm really looking at the matters of facts and law on biodiversity, off-site biodiversity, and getting this right to ensure proper process, avoid delay in future. We were told at the briefing on Monday, the planning briefing about defensible decisions, that the presumption in favour of sustainable development removes control. And what everybody said here, I agree with Councillor Reid and Councillor Baker and all the others, the Councillor else, who have said that really the important thing is that we have control here. We need to have the control to ensure that we get what's in front of us, rather than a gradual morph and what you call evolution into what 3, 4, 5, 6, 8,000 homes or whatever. And if members read the email I put out earlier, they will learn over the coming few days that some people have been keeping secret the fact there's a massive moratorium, habitats related, covering West Sussex. Horsham's local plan has just been declared toast, and it's all to do with a little snail, and the little snail is delightfully called the Aenesus vorticulus, which I think is a Harry Potter spell. Aenesus vorticulus, you're going to have to learn to say that without offending anybody. It is the little whirlpool ram's horn snail, which only lives in 3 places in the country. And it's one of the most, it's seen as a bellwether for all that sort of all of the species of which are in wetlands. So it is something which Natural England are taking extremely seriously. And as you know, there are also habitats moratoriums coming and going from Ashdown Forest across right round to the Solents on different grounds of whatever. And we need the protection here. Otherwise, we'll just get all of their 20, 30,000 homes dumped on us. I mean, there's 15,000 homes that are not going to go ahead in the Horsham area at the moment. And people will be very keen to dump them on us unless we grab our own protection. So I think it's a good idea to ask the officers to confirm to the executive that the presumption in favour of sustainable development, which is what removes our control, is entirely removed by the. Is that me already? Right, that's ridiculous. Well, that's ridiculous. Okay. I'll run through the points which we need to make. I think first one is housing numbers 2,600. Does it include elderly or care homes? That number, because there has been a suggestion that because they don't count in completions, etc., on our housing numbers, that we could end up with 3,000 or whatever just on this. Can we ask that the document be proofread and fact checked? Will you allow me to continue, please, Chairman? To fact check the SEA and SA documents, because we need to correct and revise the HRA for compliance. I've given everybody a document which is got a list of the bird numbers put out by the people who do the counts in a document from 2012. We definitely need that up-to-date data since then, because on page 136, if I can reference our members, page 136 of their document, which is part of the HRA, it says in there, it gives us 20 pairs of nightjars, 27 pairs of woodlark and 20 pairs of warblers, suggesting that those are the numbers. And it definitely states there that these relate to the peak numbers recorded over the last 10 to 15 years. That's not true. That's what was said in the citation document in 1996 about the previous 10 to 15 years. In actual fact, the number of Dartford warblers peaked at 248. The bottom line, E of Thursley, Hankling, Frensham Common is Weldon Heath Phase 2. You can see it made 248. In 2011, it was down to 4, and there is a serious problem, and we cannot afford to increase those numbers. So we need to have that sorted out. It is incorrect. You'll also see from page.
Councillor, can you just sort of start to sum up? I've got the gist of the points, and I think we can turn that into something that we can put to the executive.
Well, Chairman, I don't know where you've got with your comments and questions or questions to the executive, but we do definitely need to check with Thames Water whether there is any chance of needing to supplement the water supply for Dunsfold in the way that they hope to be able to do, given sufficient water quality. For Hazelmere, they want to get up to obtain supplementary water supply from Southern. Southern is where they have this problem with the Arun Valley SAC, where the water is being abstracted from, and obviously we need to make sure that that is included in the habitats regulations assessment, in the appropriate assessment. Paragraph 2.5 of the HRA.
15 seconds, and I'm going to.
Thanks. Well, paragraph 2. I mean, I've sat here for God knows an hour and a half. Okay, Chairman, I did expect not to be able to speak anyway. Paragraph 2.5 of the HRA on page 134 confirms the expectation that the 104 hectare Parker open space will reduce residential visits to the spas. The appropriate assessment must include a detailed assessment of the extent to which that is likely to be effective. And paragraph 3.3.2 on page 137 quotes the LPP1 evidence that 9-kilometre catchment applies to only 70%.
Okay. So I think I've now given you 7 minutes. So
Chairman, I think what I'm going to have to do is to put these in writing.
Absolutely, you've jumped the gun slightly. So summarising your points then,
well, Chairman, if I can just summarise the most important point, that this HRA is entirely dependent upon and states that it is dependent upon there having been no change, as Councillor Reid, sorry, I think it was Councillor Elton.
I think the point was
from
raised,
LPP1,
for me as the chairman, for me to summarise rather than speakers.
Sorry, you just asked me to summarise my point, which is that LPP1 did not have an HRA, and that's confirmed at paragraphs 251 of that document.
I'm sure Mark has recorded those points. Most of them I've got to Zach to consider the points relating to the snails, the West Sussex. I'm summarising it right down. There was the Thames Water. The question about the elderly care homes, well, they do count in numbers. It's the SIL and everything else, which comes very differently. And the fact that about proofreading and fact checking the document before it goes out for consultation, I'm sure we would take that as a given that would be done, because if the executive are putting their name to it, then it will be down to them if they haven't done that point.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of examples, if you want, Chairman.
I'm sure there is. And what I'd say is, if you have bits that you think are factually or grammatically wrong, if you can put them on a document.
When I've got Surrey meetings and other meetings, I mean, I really can't spend all my time on this thing here, writing essays for everybody. I'd hoped I'd be able to run through it here, but if not.
No, if you've got additional points that you haven't covered, please just forward them. I'm happy for them to be included within the information that goes to the executive, and the executive will consider them on their own merits, as they will with the points that we've raised. Zach, do you want to just
we could do that
quickly?
here, but never mind.
Well, the other thing I was just very quickly going to say was this what we're asking for comments to go to the executive, for the executive to agree for the document to go out to consultation. And obviously Councillor Hyman and any of the councillors are perfectly welcome to put in their comments on the SPD during that 4-week consultation period as well. And obviously that will give you a bit more time to make those points. I just wanted to correct a couple of points, or at least clarify a couple of points. Paragraph 3.1 of the HRA that's attached to this document does make it absolutely clear that the data that's in there is from the citation of 1996. And no one's pretending it's not, but that was the last citation that Natural England provided. I appreciate there have been these additional counts, etc. But it was quite clear that what was printed in there is not trying to cover up anything or change the numbers. It's quoting directly from a document which is publicly available. So, you know, I just need to make that point. I just want to clarify something, because I think I heard Councillor Hyman say that there was no HRA for the local plan part 1. Well, I have to clarify and correct that. There was an HRA for the local plan part 1. If there hadn't been a HRA, it wouldn't have got through the inspector's examination. The inspector did look through the HRA and concluded that the plan was sound. So I don't know what more we can say on that.
That was before the legal judgment, wasn't it, Chairman?
And can I just say that the numbers that are being proposed, I mean, there was mention of, oh, it could go up to 3,000, 4,000. Well, no, the numbers in the SPD are entirely consistent with the local plan allocation. So reference to tilted balance is irrelevant. This is an allocated site in an adopted local plan. So you know, I understand your point about habitats and the law.
It would be nice to be able to debate this.
No, can I please finish, Councillor Hyman? Can I finish, Chairman? Thank you. Yeah. So whilst I take the points that the point that Councillor Hyman was trying to make, I personally think that's an irrelevant point, because the tilted balance doesn't apply to sites that are allocated within an adopted local plan, which this is. That's the only point I was going to make. Thank you.
All I can suggest, Councillor Hyman, if there's additional point, I didn't want this meeting to get into going through each paragraph, what needs to be changed and word and everything else. That's not what our role is tonight. But I would welcome, and I'm sure the executive would welcome, any comments of that level of detail that is forwarded to them, because you know, it's not what the public meeting's for. It's to decide whether this should go for public consultation, and this is just one part of the stage. You've raised your points. We will raise the issues of doing the proofreading and fact checking, which is basically what you're saying is there's facts that are wrong. Well, there's an obligation to check the facts. And if they're not done, then they haven't complied with the recommendations of this ONS committee. So, Councillor Follows, I saw your hand sort of going up.
It was merely to say thank you to you, Chair, and also the committee for such a constructive debate on this subject. The revised ONS structure invites you and the Vice Chair of the committee to our exec brief at the end of each cycle. So as well as having the recommendations in written form from the committee, you, of course, and the Vice Chair will be able to come and discuss them with the executive directly. So thank you all very much for your contributions this evening.
Okay. Before I close the meeting, are there any points anybody else would like to raise which hasn't been covered? Silence is golden. Mark.
Just to clarify, the recommendation presumably is we would like or you would like the executive to note and respond to, and then essentially list the points.
Yeah, well, what I scribbled down is said the ONS supports the principle of an SPD and has during its deliberations raised a number of points for note and potential inclusion. And then we added on top of that, they were asking for the executive to ensure that the document is proofread and fact checked. And there was the points that, you know, we could just list the points, which included those last ones about Thames Water, how much water do they need to go to Southern and all that. We don't need to talk about that now, but the points have been raised. That's covered.
Sorry, Chairman, can we just change note to consider? don't want them just noted, thanks, I'm sat here, you know.
I was only whilst I was listening to people writing.
I'd like them at least to consider it, even if it's only a nanosecond.
Well, I would like to think it'd be more than consider, because otherwise what's the point of coming to and bringing it to us? So I'd like to consider and include, really, you know, because I think there's some good points to be made, and if they're not taken up, more for them. That's all I would say. Councillor Darcy.
Yeah, sorry, just a question. I noticed that there was mention of a village car park near the village centre, but it didn't, as far as I could see, didn't specify where that would be. And I wondered if that was something that should be included, some suggestion of where it would be.
Okay, well, we can include that on the point. Obviously, that's getting into a little bit more detail, but again, Mark, we can include that. That needs to be more information for the public to see what the location. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to say on a point of order, I'd just like to remind this committee and officers that all comments should be addressed to the chair through the chair, and then we will avoid having a head-to-head argument. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Any other points before I call the meeting for a halt? So thank you, everybody, for your attendance. Mark will circulate his comments in due course of his notes. So thank you very much. Would you like to stop the recording? Apologies, yes. Does everybody agree that? Thank you for that. It makes it official. Thank you for that.